Good evening, good afternoon, good morning. Welcome to the gaming series MBtv Debates. Here we are at Rui Cunha Foundation for the second installment of MBtv series. The previous one was on property, and now we delve into the city's core industry, the first one of the new gaming series in co-organization in partnership between Macau Business, MBtv, and Rui Cunha Foundation. We are looking into, as I was saying, the city's core industry, the future, the talk of the town. We are sitting at a critical juncture, and we are joined by a distinguished panel of highly distinguished and well-known panelists and experts. Some of them who have been playing an active role over the past couple of decades in shaping the way the SAR has evolved into the world's top gaming jurisdiction. We are joined today by Jorge Oliveira. He's joining us via Zoom from Lisbon. He's a former commissioner for legal affairs at Macau Gaming Commission. He was member of the Macau Commission for the first public tender to grant concessions to operate casino games of chance. He was also a senior government draftsman of the new Macau SAR's gaming legal framework, and he was in Portugal a junior minister for the internationalization of the Portuguese economy. He played a pivotal role back in the early 2000s when the city was gearing up for the liberalization of the gaming industry, and also more intensively over the first decade of the Macau SAR. Also someone who's joining us, another distinguished guest joining us, who also played a relevant role back then and is still following the Macau industry, is David Green. He is the founder of Newpage Consulting. David Green has advised on casino regulation in a number of geographies, including New Zealand, Singapore, Macau, Cambodia, and Japan. He served as a presiding member of the Independent Gambling Authority in South Australia prior to relocating to Macau in 2001, where he served also as an advisor to the Macau SAR government. He's joining us via Zoom from Australia. And here in Macau, we have Ben Lee. He's been based in Macau for about 16 years. Is also one of the region's foremost experts in the area of Asian gaming market. He's been a speaker at gaming conferences. He has extensive gaming experience all over Asia and also Australia. And among the many, he currently serves as a consultant to numerous multinational companies. He's also a partner at IGamix, and among the many positions that he held in the past, he was a vice president of casino marketing for Venetian Macau. As a discussant, we have with us also here at Rui Cunha Foundation, Nuno Sardinha da Mata, a senior partner at CNC Lawyers, a well-seasoned attorney and a legal expert who's been based in Macau for about 3 decades. And we are, last not the least, by no means the least, Paulo Azevedo will be co-chairing this session. He's joining us from Portugal to steer over this very interesting and hopefully fascinating discussion and debate. I'd like to thank all of you, first and foremost, Rui Cunha Foundation, and all of you who are here physically joining us at Rui Cunha Foundation, and the around 100 participants who have joined us or are joining us via Zoom. There's so much on the agenda. Paulo, could you please jump in and throw your hat into the ring, and let's kickstart this heated and fascinating talk.
Indeed.
Paulo
Hello.
Who's the chairman and founder of Project Asia and of Macau Business Publications.
Thank you, Zé Carlos. Hello again. It is a great pleasure to see some of these speakers again, and a wow group it is. After all, these are the Macau Business TV debates in partnership with Rui Cunha Foundation, we could not fail to bring you a talk show with the best group of guest speakers. Whether in the auditorium, live in Macau, or elsewhere in the world, keep your questions coming. My role today is also to put them to our guests, as well as to our service commentator, Nuno Sardinha da Mata. It seems nowadays, every time I write or talk, I need to have a lawyer around me. Joking, hopefully. Well, Zé Carlos, we're ready to go, and I'll take this opportunity and I'll go straight into it. Jorge, I'll start with you, my friend. You led the team that drew the current gaming law. Whether you want or not, you ended up labeled as, let's call it, the father of the post-liberalization Macau gaming law. We have to ask, we are already in the second half of 2020, and a government decision on new licenses is expected in less than 2 years. And in the middle, there must be an international public tender. In your opinion, is this process too late, or should we prepare for any surprises?
Thank you, Paulo. Hi to everybody. Well, it's a good question in the sense that a lot has changed from 20 years ago. The current concessions and sub-concessions have all been aligned to, I think, 26 June 2022. And obviously, I think this means that the idea is to, and that's what makes sense, to launch one tender alone. Last time, one of the main differences last time, although Macau was clearly the main or one of the main gaming markets in the range of all the operators, today there's no doubt that Macau is the largest casino gaming center in the world, and everybody wants to have a foot there. So we don't need, the Macau government does not need to launch expressions of interest or to try to find out or to try to convince regulators to let large casino guns come to the tender. That has already been done, and everybody knows what the red lines are. So I don't think that, so to that extent, less time is required. On the other hand, there are differences that are more clear. In the there was not a lot of critical mass last time that when the first tender was launched. Today there are you have a lot of critical mass. Macau became an international market, followed by dozens of investment analysts. I would say that the main difference is this, and this will force the government to not to necessarily to move fast. Also, I mean, from outside you have the Macau government, but the Macau government has changed in its composition. So the new chief executive and new secretaries, they are only in this position recently. I believe that policy and policy change has, or eventual policy change has started way before this new government. The big difference, in my opinion, is that it is necessary to have an open discussion. And it is, I don't think it is going to be possible, even if, I don't think the government wants it, but I don't think, even if it wanted, I don't think it's possible to have a closed decision-making as it happened last time, because there wasn't also a lot of people in Macau whom you could talk, in the sense that there was not enough critical mass that would allow you to review and discuss deeply some of the issues inherent to policy making. This time there is, both in Macau and outside Macau, because a lot of the investment analysts, of the headquarters of the groups, of the financing entities, even if they're outside Macau, they have significant vested interests in Macau. And all these entities need and should be heard, because this is the way to conduct a good tender. This tender, in short, will have to be more open, more transparent, and in my opinion, it's going to be politically, it's more risky. And I think that's why we are feeling from the past government and from this government a great prudence in the way of launching things and defining methodologies.
Okay, George, thank you so much. I'll go straight into to David Green. David, you believe the best would be to postpone the tender altogether. And let me read the first question that we received. It's from a lawyer, Pedro Cortes, that is asking, what can the panelists envisage as being the public policies for the tender in case it happens? Because I think Pedro, that there will be no international bid, but otherwise the government will extend under the current legislation. David, your thoughts, please.
Well, I have to say I agree with that. I think there have been a number of external shocks to the system since 2014 and the well-publicised shock caused by the crackdown on corruption in the PRC. More recently, of course, on everyone's lips is COVID. And the COVID impact has been such that I don't think any of us would have envisaged seeing a 95% decline in gross gaming revenue in Macau at any point. Added to that, of course, is the tension which has arisen between the PRC and the US. And US operators, of course, form part of that critical mass which Jorge talked about. I think overall what it's doing is resulting in a re-rating of risk for Macau as a host territory. And the re-rating really is based on what's happening in source markets, what's happening in China in particular, not only in terms of the movement of people, but also geopolitically, what attitude is likely to prevail at any given point of time that might be relevant if we're talking about the tender proceeding to schedule, which is 2022. And I think at the moment there's a real risk for the government in this, that they may have expectations that are just too high, whether they are in relation to maintaining tax rates, the investment commitment they might require, a licence fee that they may require, some sort of premium for participation. And I just think at the moment it is too uncertain, there is too much sovereign risk, there is too much environmental and public health risk associated with making a decision to proceed with that tender now. And the mechanism in Article 16, in Law 16, is quite clear that if there are exceptional circumstances, the Chief Executive can extend the term of the concessions for up to 5 years. And my feeling is that it may well require, if not the full 5 years, certainly most of it, in order to get some sort of return to what we might call a long-term stable outlook for the industry in Macau.
Thank you, David. George, before we go to Ben, I'll go back to you. If the government wants to postpone this process, as some people are defending, including David, and since you draw the first legislation, what should be the right move in terms of legal procedure? And do you agree that this should be the way to go?
I basically agree with what David said. Today, there's just too much uncertainty. It's normal that no government wants to take any decision before trying to see how this is going to settle and to have an idea of how this is going to evolve, how the COVID crisis is going to evolve. It is very likely that more time is required. in my opinion, if today there would be a relative consensus in that direction, but I don't think that it would be very wise to put now a draft bill, either taking a decision that is the chief executive's prerogative, or if you want to go beyond the 5 years to make an amendment in that direction, or proposed amendment in that direction, that would have to go to the legislative assembly. I think it is necessary to be able to wait a bit to see more clear how this is going to evolve, but definitely the willingness to do that, it seems to be one of the strong possibilities. Yes, it is there. The only thing that I think is important, that no one gets different ideas, is that when China is moving towards more transparency and more tenders, Macau is not going to backtrack on that direction. So I don't think that the solution will be anything like consecutive new deadlines with new terms for the contracts or new renewals. I think that a tender will take place. A tender has to be prepared, and I think is being prepared. But it is probably it is unwise to do it. I agree with David, when the overall Macau brand and the overall assessment has changed, and we need to see some level of normalcy before a decision is taken and the path for a policy is put on the table. So I don't think we're going to see it tomorrow or after tomorrow.
Thank you so much, Jorge. Ben, and before I pass to my colleague, Zé Carlos, Ben, you are one of those analysts that talk constantly to sources and try to connect all the dots. What is the feeling? Because it's, at this moment, we just have basically the feeling. We don't have so far any information coming out from the ICJ or the government, the secretary or the chief executive. What is the feeling that you have so far related to this matter, Ben?
Thank you, Paulo. So that's a very interesting question. Wasn't expecting that. But essentially, what has been happening is that up until maybe about 6 to 9 months ago, the investors, predominantly the US-based investors, have been very sanguine, very secure in their belief that the US operators are not at risk from this new concession tender. And they've used terms like renewal or retender to try and imply that the existing operators will all be conferred the new concessions. And I'm one of the very early ones, if not the first ones, to start talking about this is not a renewal, it's not a retender. It is, in essence, a totally new concession bidding process to which all newcomers are welcome. And I believe the new chief executive have actually come out and said that. Now, in terms of, to answer your question, the interesting thing is there is actually very little chatter in Macau about what is going to happen with this new concession process. That it's absolutely, totally silent, to which one can only come up with the conclusion that the process, or more importantly, the outcome, is not likely to be determined here, but north of us in Beijing. And I think that that's a pretty common conclusion, or basically hypothesis, that most people on the ground here have. I hope that answers the question. Now, in terms of the process itself, I'm known as a contrarian, so I'm going to give you a it's a speculation out of left field, in that while the process and the outcome is likely to be determined, I don't believe that there's going to be an extension of the existing concessions, primarily because the path, the game plan, is already set in place. Now, one of two key questions that have been asked in the last 2-3 years is that how did 3 concessions become 6? And more importantly, how did the Americans end up with 50% of this huge industry here in Macau? And this is the first chance our authorities has to reset the seats at the table. And I think that's something that has to be factored in. And also the fact that, you know, the whole gaming liberalization was to help Macau diversify its economy away from gaming. But what's happened actually since then is that we have become even more so on gaming and critically dependent on one market, which is China. So in terms of what the desired outcome would be, I think that it could probably well be a Singapore style managed tender process whereby the objectives are pretty much set and the operators will have to come in and specify what non-gaming amenities they will commit to investing in. And as opposed to past, whereas we have a lot of bait and switch, a very common American term, I think this time around, whatever amenities are promised, they will have to stick to those promises.
Thank you, Ben. I'd like to hook up on what you just said, and regardless of whether there will be an extension or whether there will be a public tender next year, let's look at the bigger picture, taking into account the direction that you're pointing at. And Jorge, let's say, okay, let's start by the issue of the current model that we have, 3 concessions and 3 sub-concessions. This is, of course, one of the many issues which would probably be related to the other issues such as additional strings attached to what we'll see in the future concession contracts. And also the criteria in the future public tender. What's in your crystal ball in this respect? You played a key role back then, 3 + 3, 6 fully fledged concessions, more additional players. What could we expect? Jorge.
Perhaps I will just stick to the number, because the other things I think it's more productive if we discuss one at a time.
Let's start
on the number, the issue of the number is a pure political decision. Last time number 3 came out, it was one of the very few instructions that the Macau government received from the central government. And it was done so because basically the leader of the non-monopolistic group was not knowing whether there would be a lot of competition and what would happen in the Macau gaming market, basically moved around decision centers in China. And I believe that is the reason why we received the instruction for a very restricted number of 3. Later, for other reasons, first to resolve a problem with the Galaxy Venetian relationship, and also because there was a merger taking place internationally, we use the sub-concession mechanism to allow more operators to come into the Macau market, namely the large casino guns in the world. If you look around, only the Harris Group did not come into Macau, but given the model of international large resorts that we wanted to have in Macau, at the time it didn't really look like a great loss. So to cut a long story short, the number can be 6 or a bit or slightly different. I don't think there's any reason to be different, because I don't think that there's any other group that it is relevant to bring to Macau or to attract to Macau. The most important thing that I don't think is going to change is the model of Macau. And the model of Macau is not an open model. It's an oligopolistic framework based on the concession system. And that oligopolistic framework, which allows for a large cake to be divided between several operators, comes with a very high level of taxation. That model, I think, is going to remain. I don't think if you look at the composition of the Legislative Assembly, that's where the discussion took place. And I don't think that there will be anyone, even from the central authorities, that will get into that deep level of discussion. We are going to have that, the maintenance of that kind of system. It may be 6, it's easier. When you don't have a reason to change, you keep things the way they are. So, because any government that comes with a different number will have to explain far more if it doesn't change the number. So, but again, it's a political decision. What I don't think is going to change is the model of an oligopolistic framework with a high level of taxation.
And a follow-up question, Jorge. This is a separate issue, but it is linked with it shortly, which is the third-party agreements and the other players, the so-called satellite casinos. Do you foresee any sort of...
But Zé Carlos, that we should perhaps go for a specific round on that. That's a big story. There, Macau has changed a lot. When the liberalization took place, you have what was called a 40-40-20% model in general terms. So the junket at that time had 20% of the sharing of gaming revenue. And in many cases, it was less than 20% because the system that had been put in place by STDM before forced them to go through one of the known junkets that STDM had a privileged relationship with. So in many cases, you actually have 10 to 15%. With the liberalization and the licensing of the junkets and the entrance of new junkets in the market and the relative and the high level and high relevance of the VIP gaming market, that is to say the credit market, you had a complete switch. The casino gaming, because the concessionaires were forced slowly and gradually in order to keep the large junkets in their premises and to have a larger share of the VIP market. They were forced to go from those 20 to a model which today, in many cases, is a model of, to use the expression before, 45-55. And this distorted everything in the sense that it does not make sense to look into for instance, in the investment obligations of a casino, of a tenderer for a casino concession, when the bulk of the investment is going to be done is actually being done either by the business partner or by a junket that works closely with him. So this does not happen with all of the groups, but when you have such a situation, this forces us to discuss not only the tender for concessionaires, but the overall regulatory framework of how the concessionaires should relate with the junkets and the level of obligations impending on the junkets, because they became far more relevant in the Macau equation. And but this is a long discussion.
Sure.
And
I'm
where I
casting the
suspect
wide...
there will not be consensus.
Yeah, sure. Casting the web pretty wide. It's all this fascinating stuff. David, okay, let's look at the issue of the number of concessions first, and then also hooking it up with the issue of the other players, the so-called satellite casinos. What's your take on all this discussion of the model, the number of, on the one hand, keeping the same model that we've got, on the other hand, within this model, the format of 3 + 3 or 6 or more concessions. What's your take on this?
Well, I'm in furious agreement with Jorge, which is not infrequent, but I certainly agree with the premise of what he said. And I think it would confuse the issue greatly to have any increase in the number of concessions. It would confuse it for several reasons. Firstly, being 6 and extending that as 6 confers a degree of, I guess, limited exclusivity. But to blow it out to 7, 8, 10, whatever it might be, would really destroy that limited exclusivity and therefore reduce the premium which any of the existing 6 concessionaires might be willing to offer. or the investment that they might be willing to make. I don't see those as necessarily alternatives. They may be cumulative. It's just difficult to know because the government has given no real indication as to what its expectations are in that regard. But just imagine what would happen if they did decide to increase the number. It would be very difficult to make decisions when you've already got the best operators in the business on the ground in Macau. Would you award it to a state-owned enterprise from the PRC? Would you award it to a large listed public company from China? Or would you award it to a secondary player from somewhere in the West? It raises real issues, in my opinion, about the process and the expectations that government might have. Frankly, any expectations the government had in 2001 have been wildly exceeded. I had a discussion, and I think Jorge was present when it occurred, with Edmund Ho concerning the tender, and his first question to me was, do you think anyone will be interested? Well, I think history tells us that not only were they interested, but they've all exceeded their original commitments by multiples. And unfortunately, I think that's a one-off. I think now we've had 20 years to look at the volatility of the market, look at the factors that can influence that, and it includes the evolution of the satellite operators, the partial management contracts, the people who are running their own business models under the guise of actually operating on behalf of a concessionaire. And I think that is a very distinct discussion to have, because a number of those entities now are listed. For example, Macau Legend, I'm not singling them out for any particular reason, but Paradise Entertainment, you've got certainly strong vested interests in those operations. And something has to be done with them, but I don't think you can unscramble the egg. You can't unwind time and go back to as if nothing happened. But trying to determine exactly what needs to be done with them, I think, is a discrete exercise. I don't think you want to confuse it with the concession tender.
Thank you, David. Ben, your take on this discussion. First, on the issue of the number on the model and the number of players and the rationale behind keeping this model or adjusting it or allowing more concessions to be up for grabs.
Certainly. So again, sorry for sounding like a broken record, but I'm going to give a different perspective again. So if we were to look at our 2019 gross gaming revenue, we're talking about $35 billion US. Now we've got 6 operators. Each one of them, if we were to average it out, the average is about $6 billion US per operator. You look at Singapore, they've got about a $4 to $5 billion GGR divided by 2 operators. So you're talking about $2.5 billion US per operator. Yet those operators are very, very happy to be in that market. You look at the other possibility, which is the Japan market, which, you know, in recent times there has been a lot of brouhaha that's died down. Mm-hmm. We're talking, you know, initially $80 billion market, became $40 billion, is now $10 billion. I reckon it's probably going to be similar to Singapore, around about between $4 and $6 billion US. And you've got 3 potential licenses being pursued by at least a dozen operators. So even if we were to talk about a potential 7th or 8th concession being issued in Macau, there will be operators out there who would give a lot. I won't use the phrase, but you know, they would sacrifice an arm and a leg to come into Macau for 1/7 or 1/8 of a $35 billion potential GGR. So I don't think the size of the market is a limiting factor, because at the end of the day, everybody will agree that we are the biggest market in the whole world. So the question is then, as has been mentioned before, is political. What are the purposes of limiting to 6 or maybe increasing the number of concessions? And I'll turn back to what I said initially, that if it's to dilute out the foreigners, if we were to maintain all 6 concessions as they stand, then really the only way to dilute out the foreign presence is to issue 7 or 8 concessions. Alternatively, if the decision has been made to lose 1 or 2 of the Americans, then it's a matter of diluting the equity, or basically to lose them, and that will make room for a new operator or 2 operators coming into the market.
Okay, so
Zé Carlos,
go ahead, Paulo.
let me cut it, because we also need to pay attention to our friends everywhere that are asking, and we have another friend from Macau. It's Paulo A. Regarding this matter, he asks very specifically, and I'll put it into the panel. So whoever wants to talk about it, please go ahead. Paulo A. asks, would the panelists think that increase in number of concessionaires from 6 to any higher number will, 1, dilute the high operating standard amongst concessionaires which Macau currently enjoys, 2, increase the difficulty of government supervision of more operators, or 3, not significantly increase the level of overall gaming revenue and therefore not increase significantly the level of tax revenue. Who wants to answer?
Could I perhaps kick it off, Paulo? I really wanted to follow up a little on Ben, and then it segues into this question. I think we're assuming that you can simply extrapolate the market from what it was pre-COVID to what it will be again. And I don't think that's possible for a number of reasons. Firstly, online gaming has really filled the void caused by the cessation or wind back of operations of terrestrial casinos. And they suffer none of the distributional disadvantages of terrestrial casinos. I can play from here while I'm talking to you. It's pretty simple. Secondly, you can't send your staff home from a casino to self-isolate. Unfortunately, if you're going to run a casino, you need security, you need gaming staff, etc., on the ground. And I'm not convinced that we're going to see a snapback at all. In fact, I think it may be a permanent reduction in the attractiveness and volume of business that are done through terrestrial casinos. Now, moving on to the point about a 7th or an 8th or any other number additional operations, a couple of questions. Firstly, what are we going to ask people to put up to justify their selection? Are we going to ask them for $1 billion, or is it going to be commensurate with what history tells us should perhaps be a much larger number, 10, 15, any number you like? Now that immediately disqualifies just about any other operator I can think of from being a 7th operator, because there can be no assurance that they will get any of that pie at all. The incumbents have had 20 years to build relationships. They've had 15 to 20 years to build infrastructure, and they've built government relations. They've built relations with DICJ. they've got in place all of the compliance mechanisms that are required. They're experts in the field. So I guess my conclusion is that I can't justify going with extra concessionaires, but B, if it was to happen, I think it would be to the detriment of the market. I certainly don't think it would enhance the market in Macau.
Okay, thank you so much, David. I'll take the opportunity to remind our viewers and the friends and the people that are watching us live at the auditorium in Macau that you can continue to send some questions, but not only, because this webinar, mixed webinar and live audience conference debate is being streamed live through Facebook of Rui Cunha Foundation, as well as Facebook of Macau Business. So you can also take advantage of Facebook to send us questions, or the Q&A part of this Zoom. Nuno, it's your turn. Time to kind of summarize until now. Let me put you in the hot seat, but let me give you a hand. Going back into these 3-6 more possible players in Macau. Sun City, the most important junket group, does not hide its intention to get a gambling license, and to prove it, it started to operate casinos in Russia, in Vietnam, but in the middle, this pandemic arose, which can mess plans to many people. We know that there are more conditions for more gaming licenses, like Ben says. We are the biggest market in the world, but we also know that the central government's intention is to limit them. And I believe that, as Jorge said, was a clear indication 20 years ago. I ask, has anyone changed their minds and gambling licenses are increased, or will an existing someone be out of the picture, even though this may be a bad sign for investors, because despite everything, the current 6 operators have done more than what they have committed to do. What do you think, and how do you summarize, Nuno?
Well, thank you, Paulo, for giving me the hot seat. I would say that regarding this question of the number of concessionaires, as we've seen here, there are different opinions among our experts, and basically what we have seen is that there are some more conservative views on whether we should maintain the same number of operators. And as Ben said, there is margin for other increase the number. I would say, my opinion is that it's probably given the uncertainty that the market has right now, and all those, as David was saying, pre-COVID and post-COVID questions and interrogations. Will the market be the same after COVID? Will the gamblers come after COVID the same way they have been coming to Macau before? We don't know that. So in a conservative view, and probably the most prudent view, that it's my opinion that probably will be somewhat risky to increase the number of concessionaires. Although, as you have said, there are a lot of, even in Macau, there are already not only Sun City, there are already a lot of other companies that declared their interest on being candidates for a concession. So I think that will have to be discussed also, because some of them are already quite well-positioned players and stakeholders in the market. On what regards what we have been discussing until now, if I don't know if it is useful to make just a
sum it
short
up somehow.
summary of what have been questioned and what have been the positions. Paulo, even for people that have joined the broadcasting after some of our questions were answered, Paulo initiated the hostilities by with a question to Jorge regarding the time for the tender, whether are we rushing too late to have a new tender or not. And Jorge says that he thinks we don't need so much time as we needed in the beginning, because in the beginning these were all new to us, and now we have experience and we have a lot of experienced players on the market and a lot of interested people to come to the tender. Regarding the possibility of the tender being in 2022, there is also some different opinions on the panel because some of the experts believe that it's possible that the government opts for an extension using the possibility to extend for up to 5 years under exceptional circumstances the existing concessions, giving though more time for preparing the tender, and not only also to see what is going to happen after this COVID pandemic. Ben thinks otherwise. He thinks that probably is not on the mind of the government to make that extension. Something also important after José Carlos jumping on with their questions was the opinion regarding the number of concessionaires. George, as I said, believes that 3 + 3 doesn't make any sense anymore, so it should be 6, because 3 + 3 was a dated solution for an existing problem at the time. Although George believes that there is no reason to change the model. I agree with George. I think when we have a team that is playing well, we don't make changes on the team. So the model that we are using probably is going to stay the same. Another question that seems to be important, and I don't bother you and bore you with more summaries, but just 2 points that I think are important. One of them is David says that increasing the concessionaires will jeopardize the existing limited exclusivity that we have in Macau. So that will be one of the reasons for not increasing the the concessionaires. One brief question that I think, and I would like to challenge the hosts and also the panelists to say anything more about this, because it was briefly spoken here during this first part, is the political questions involved on this. We should not forget that presently there is an international crisis and war between mainland China and US, and that may or may not have some impact on what will be the decisions to make regarding this matter. Yeah.
No, thank you. I think we should go now to ask Zé Carlos to see if anyone in the room has some questions. I have like a dozen questions more here, but we need to go to the next round of questions. Zé Carlos, do you want to ask to the auditorium if there's anyone interested in asking to our expert speakers?
Yes, well, let's open the floor here. Not only virtually, that we've been doing that through our participants via Zoom, but also here physically. We do have, I'm sure there's so much food for thought here. This is a highly somewhat controversial, relevant and critical issue. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. So I'm Carlos Fonseca. In fact, I want to ask a question, because we talk about extension, we talk about tender, we talk about number of license, but I'd like to talk a little bit about how we look at the competitors, means outside Macau, because we are not living alone in the world. And mainly when what I see is a tremendous growth of online gaming in Philippines, with a lot of Chinese people living there and doing as call centers to China. So how we look at a competition, because we need to keep the market share, keep it to be big. We are very big, but I saw very big companies like Kodak go away because they thought there's no competition. So I would like to listen a little bit more about competition overseas, means Japan, Cambodia, Vietnam, Philippines, and why Macau is not yet ready for also a percentage of the gaming to be online gaming.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carlos Fonseca. Ben, perhaps you'd like to address this, to be the first one to address this, and then we'll ask Jorge and David to jump in, because, you are based in Macau, but you've been traveling around and working as a consultant, and you know very well the industry, first-hand experience in the region. What's your comment?
Thank you, Jose. That's a very good question, and it was a point that David Green touched on earlier. I've actually been and seen those online gaming centers myself in the Philippines and in Cambodia. Let me just tell you now that the online industry has very little intersection with the land-based casinos. The online industry is targeted primarily at the really grind mass market, the bottom end of the market in China, the ones that can't afford to travel or don't travel at all. To target these people, the online operators hire armies of young, early to late 20s youths who are always constantly on their WeChat, on their social apps, posing as potential players, trying to entice people to come in and play, give them credit, and get them hooked on gambling. They are not the people who would travel out of China to gamble in land-based casinos. Very different segment of market, and I've seen, the two segments. So the boom in the online industry in the Philippines and in Cambodia did not come about because of, and did not come because of the decline in gaming revenue. It did not cause the decline of gaming revenue in Macau. It's just coincidental, right? The boom in Philippines came about because the Philippine regulator, PAGCOR, started issuing online licenses for the online operators so they could legitimately operate in the Philippines and targeted countries outside the Philippines. Similarly in Cambodia, what enabled Cambodia was the fact that the government initially allowed them to operate, but the trigger was the fact that 3 submarine cables went into Sihanoukville in Cambodia in 2017, and that enabled online, right? So in terms of what David mentioned earlier, I don't think there's any intersection. I certainly haven't seen the possibility that the people who operate in the online industry are the same people who operate in the junk industry. There is a little bit of intersection, but by far and large, they are 2 different markets.
Jorge and David, would you like to jump in and address this issue? David, you were actually bringing in this online gaming factor.
Yeah, look, thanks for the opportunity. And I acknowledge what Ben's saying. However, we can't assume that the conduct of gaming operations in casinos is going to be the same going forward as it has been up to date. For several reasons. Firstly, there's a real push now to go cashless. People don't want to be handling money because of the concerns about public health. And I've seen that myself in recent months in Australia. People will not accept cash in transactions. It's all credit card or debit card. Secondly, social distancing in casinos is going to work very much against the whole dynamic of Chinese gaming, which is stack them in, get them round the tables where the excitement is, get them back betting, and really amp the volume of play. You accelerate the flow of money. Now, I don't subscribe to the view that that just continues as though nothing happened. It can't continue as though nothing happened. The other point to make is that sports betting increasingly is offering, I think, an entry point for people who, for demographic reasons or for physical reasons, may not be comfortable in travelling to terrestrial casinos. COVID has made a mess of those over 60. Now, I haven't recently looked at the demographic structure of players coming into Macau, but we can't rely on the fact that suddenly we'll get a resurgence of VIP and that will drag the whole industry back to where it was in 2019. I consider that to be impossible. And it's not as though this particular pestilence of COVID is the first in the line. If you look back over the last 20 years, we've had SARS, we've had MERS, we've had swine flu, we've had bird flu, epidemics with the potential to be pandemics. And I think it is going to change the business model, which is what drives how casinos run. And it equally will flow through to markets like Japan, where I suspect operators are not going to be saying, I'll spend $10 billion. I suspect they'll be saying, look, we can only justify spending a fraction of that amount. But again, I'm just speculating. I'm not speaking on the basis of having particular insight. But you can see that evolving.
Your thoughts on it? Thank you, David. Your thoughts on all this debate?
Oh, I think you meant George.
George, yes,
Well,
please go ahead.
Yeah,
Yes, your views.
in general terms, first, I would tend to, for a long time, I would tend to agree with Ben in the sense that online betting does not cannibalize significantly or relevantly in the brick and mortars casino operation. I'm not so sure if that is the case today. What do I mean by this is, when we talk about online, in my opinion, today we should really, in operational terms, we should split online. The online that is purely artificial, yes, I would tend to agree with that. The online that comes out from live streaming or quasi-live streaming, I'm not so sure today. And the sheer numbers of Chinese operators or employees or associates that was forced out of Sihanoukville after pressure from China regarding online operation shows that we are already in front of a very, very large scale operation that has to be taking away a significant portion of disposable income from punters in China. When China forced the decision and Cambodia sent those people away, we're talking about 10,000 people. Now, these are people that are not necessarily to operate the front office. They are obviously back office people that are receiving online calls via phone through a streaming operation. And this started before in a number of casinos. It's not an issue also only for China. It's also an issue for Thailand, for instance, which has several casinos around its borders. And more, this is growing. And I think that one of the things that clearly we need is more research and studies as regards the relevance of especially this kind of online gaming and streaming online gaming. Secondly, I think David has a point. I don't think that we should theorize too much today on how different the world post-COVID is going to be, because I sincerely think we don't have enough data. I think we have to wait some more time. Some of the things may change. And one of the things that I agree that will change is probably the willingness to, from everybody on the sector, to have more different kinds of payment, or to increase the payments that are not based on cash. So that already was there. It does not, but I'm not sure how really it's going to affect the situation. Last but not the least, when you talk about today, although many times some of us speak about gaming, actually, let's precise this. We are talking about casino gaming. Now, one of the problems in Macau is that, and I know this for a fact because I tried several times to have decision-making regarding liberalizing other kinds of gaming in Macau, and there was never political agreement from the powers to be. The reason was because casino gaming already meant 99% of the revenue, and because people tend to look at the situation from the model they know. So even if you show them, you can have sports betting that can make far more money than Hong Kong, for instance, and then the relevance in terms of percentage was significant. Even if you explain that if you bring large online operators, you can have several possibilities. That has never been allowed. In my opinion, we are not going to have any decision, and it's pointless to debate a lot about changes on other kinds of gaming. I don't think that we are going to have other kinds of gaming in Macau liberalizing, although they should be. They should be. The general principle is always the same. We should have more competition. More competition enhances GGR and forces the operators to operate more efficiently, and in my opinion, as Macau has shown, more in a more law-abiding and more compliant way. Last but not the least,
Jorge, sorry, let me go back to you and ask you. I attended a seminar where you talked on online gaming back in the days when you were the government's main legal expert. In that seminar, if you recall, at the old Mandarin Oriental, you predicted that online gaming would happen. But I suspect, I thought at one point, the central government said no to the Macau government, which came a stronger instruction when Xi Jinping came into power. However, you now saying that you believe you know, it was not political. So let me ask you, why didn't online gaming started over 15 years ago when you hoped it would?
Because when we created critical mass to be at ease to regulate it, at that time, the chief executive had lost significant power out of the corruption scandal with the Secretary for Public Works, Alman Law. So the issue is, he did not want to risk a negative directive from Beijing. There was never a directive from Beijing. And he could not risk having a very complicated discussion in the Legislative Assembly, which he was not sure that would go the way he thought. He had always been a strong support of the liberalization of online gaming and of the potential that Macau has as center for online gaming. Today, the situation changed completely. The posture that the Chinese government took vis-a-vis other neighboring countries, I don't think will allow a lot of leeway for central authorities to be more understanding to the kind of to Macau operators targeting Chinese punters in the mainland. I don't think it is a good idea, but the world is very big. Macau has a very good brand in terms of gaming, there is a great potential for online gaming, even if you start with other destinations other than mainland China. That would be politically correct, and definitely there's a great potential, obviously even greater once you have 5G, but operating. So in my opinion, there's a great potential there, but there's also great potential in terms of sports betting. There's also great potential in terms of being punters for casino operations from other parts than China. One of the most miserable things that I think that we definitely all failed in Macau is that we thought about creating, for instance, tables that would operate and rooms that would operate in other currencies as a way to incentivize junkets to bring punters from other countries. Today, we probably have less Thai customers in Macau than we had in STDM times. Today, we don't have in Macau Southeast Asian gamblers, which we lost at a certain time for fiscal reasons to Australia, and makes sense. But today, with the sharing of gaming revenue, it would be possible for some of those operators, for some of those junkets, to try to grab the back and to make reconnections in that direction. One of the ways of diversifying is diversifying even in casino gaming. We do not have to target only Chinese, urban China, which is what happened today. Macau can have an operation that extends to South Asia, that can extend to Southeast Asia, that extends to more deeply in Japan, in Korea, and a lot of what can be done and that should be pondered and should be put as conditions should be in that line. We should force. When we speak about diversification, we're always thinking about the diversification on other areas of activities apart from gaming, and that's good. That's the normal thing. But there's a lot to diversify in gaming itself, not only in other modalities, but also in casino gaming itself, considering the main markets from where the visitors to Macau stream from. And a lot of that has never been discussed, and we should discuss that. But those are many discussions that we cannot accommodate today, definitely.
Thank you. We have questions nowadays. Now I've been flooded by questions. I need to put some, if not, our viewers will not have an answer. Rui Proença, regarding this matter, asks, how likely is it for the possibility of offering online gaming be considered on an upcoming tender? Jorge, I believe you don't believe that it will happen at this stage. David, Ben, what do you think?
Let me answer that first, David, if that's okay with you. So let me I'll take a step back and address something in terms of the online and give you hopefully some insights. So we were commissioned to do a market study of Sinokville in 2019. The potential revenue from the online gaming segment in Sinokville, we estimated to be somewhere around $5 to $6 billion. In the Philippines, and industry insider confided to us that it's potentially somewhere around 25 billion US. And if you were to look at a recent South China Morning Post article, the reporter got a different figure from an operator as well. And the figure that this reporter got was $115 billion US. So, you know, take your pick. It's somewhere from 5-6 billions to 115 billion. Now, coming back to another point that George touched on about the online, we separate the online vis-a-vis proxy or phone betting, which is where you have a customer in China or somewhere else for that matter who communicate a betting through a proxy sitting at the table. In Macau, we used to call it telephone betting. In the Philippines, we call it proxy. Now, you can actually guess the amount of revenue there. So the gross gaming revenue that's reported monthly for the Philippine casino, they're divided into 3 categories: mass, high roller, and junket. So you can probably safely assume that around 70% of the junket revenue is actually derived from what we know as proxy or telephone betting. So you actually have a quantifiable figure for proxy telephone betting vis-a-vis online. And also I want to touch another question that David brought on about evolution. I agree with him. Things are not going to go back to the pre-pandemic level quickly. It will be a while, but the one thing that we have here in Macau is potentially a travel bubble with China that no other country in the world or region will have. If you look at the upsurge in domestic tourism, Hainan hotel bookings have gone up tremendously. The amount of revenge travel, revenge spending, again, year on year, according to C-Trip and other online booking industries, have jumped up and accelerated. So yes, while we're still in the early stages of recovery, but once the travel bubble is fully in, you know, Macau will be the first to recover from the pandemic. Look at, David was asking about the visitation numbers. Forget IVS, that the growth in IVS has been minuscule. It will probably recover, but more importantly, everybody has ignored, overlooked transit visas. Transit visas last month, in the month of July, was 32,000. In the month of August, transit visa doubled to 64,000 versus IVS of around about 3,000 for the whole month. So, you know, the numbers speak for themselves, you know, and not only that, but in terms of table separation, absolutely, you know, it's going to be thinned out. We're not wanting to see the 27 million mainland Chinese that came to Macau in 2019, right? The VIPs, the premium mass, they're more likely to be what we focus on because a small number will generate a huge amount of revenue, and the government doesn't care whether it's mass or VIP because they still get their 40% cut off the gross gaming revenue.
All right. Interesting points. So I will reopen, thank you, Ben. I will reopen the floor to more questions from those who are joining us here at Rui Cunha Foundation. I'm sure there's more people who'd like to throw in a couple of questions. If not, Paulo.
If not, I have more. Yes, I have plenty here. Still from Rui Proença, and going back, continued on the online gaming. Rui asks, Macau, which is true, Macau already offers a type of online gaming through its sports betting concessionaire. He asks, could this market be liberalized in this context? So let me put something on the table. A part of the design of the casinos when they came into Macau, especially the American casinos, was to have, you know, those big bars with several gigantic TVs where you could bet on NBA, cricket, or other more interesting sports. But then nothing happened, and Macau slot continues to have its gaming renewed year after year. So going back to Rui Proença's question, could this market be liberalized in this context of at least the sports betting? David, you wanna talk about it?
Well, I've spoken to a number of international sports betting operators over the years, and it's clearly not possible to stream sports bets into casinos in Macau at the present time. Whether that should change, I actually agree that it would be a very interesting portfolio differentiation for the casinos now if they could introduce sports betting. You don't make money out of the sports book normally. You make money out of the fact that it keeps people on property for the duration of an event, which might be an hour, it might be 3 or 4 hours in the case of Super Bowl. But right now, Macau Slot, of course, has got a monopoly on football and basketball. You've also got the Hong Kong Jockey Club and its particular online football operations. I'm not sure that it's politically going to be something that would fly. But certainly back in 2003, I believe it was, there was actually a company called abex88.com, which purported to be operating out of Macau. And that was a sports betting company, purportedly incorporated in Ireland. That was shut down very quickly once it went public that it existed through the South China Morning Post. And nothing to my knowledge, has reappeared to replace it. So it would need its own regime. It would need some amendments to Law 16, clearly. And it would also, of course, need arrangements with the product owners, which is the providers of that sport material. But it's not impossible. I just don't think there's a political will to drive it.
Yeah,
Jorge,
let's go there, because I think we're losing a lot of time on what David said is correct from a business point of view. The issue is there political willingness to allow casino operators in Macau to operate other kinds of gaming? I would not bet my money on it. Not 10 years ago, not 15 years ago, not in 5 years from now. Forget it. It's not going to happen, first. Secondly, I don't think there's a political will. I would not also recommend it, to be very plain. Secondly, I disagree from the view that sports betting can only operate or can operate better within casino premises. Now, in Las Vegas, that's the case. There are other places where that's the case, but there are many other places in Europe where you can have very successful sports betting operations without being integrating it with integrated resorts owned by casino concessionaires. And in my view, we go back to the political decision. Is it likely that in Macau or more up north, one wants casino operators to have more people employed, to be more economically relevant? No. The answer, let's be clear, is no. Nobody's going to say this publicly. There's nothing written in any instructional directive that I know, but I think it would be very unwise to assume otherwise. So that's why, in my opinion, I don't think there's a point in creating expectations to sports betting entities. Now, as regards online gaming, I don't think that the current Macau government will be willing to go in that direction, given the kind of message that China is sending to the neighboring countries. But there is a case. There's a case to build for online gaming skills to be construed, to be creative, to target other markets. With operators that would integrate with the new means of payment from the Chinese world, the new means of payment that are expanding into Southeast Asia and to other parts of the world. That is something that might be considered. But it has to be very well done. It has to be very well prepared. And to this, it would be necessary that the Macau government would have generated in the last decade critical mass and people able to reason strategically. And in my opinion, that did not happen because the government was not very competent at that, to be plain.
Talking about, thank you, Jorge. Talking about political issues and taking it to a higher level in terms of geopolitical issues. Nuno Sardinha da Mata was a while ago hinting at something which could be regarded, I would say, as a sort of elephant in the room, which is obviously the issue of the ongoing US-China increased tensions. And this is a widely commented issue, but of course I think we should address it. Ben, you did mention that in your first answer, you kind of mentioned because of what could be a potential impact with regards to the outcome of the future tender. What's your view on the US-China tensions factor?
Well, again, pardon me if I speak too bluntly.
Oh, bluntly is good. Isn't that, Paulo?
So, investors would, when I explain the potential risks to the American operators here in Macau in the forthcoming tender, the usual response from them would be, they would not want to, China would not want to take the risk of antagonizing the current US administration, to which my answer would be, Huawei grosses $120 billion worth of revenue per annum versus Sands with about $12 billion a year. So, and now it's not just Huawei versus Sands. It is, you've got additional complications in TikTok and WeChat, and knowing that an escalation of the war of words to encompass the virus situation being called China virus, and now the South Island issue. So I'm not for one side or the other. I'm just looking at what the situation is as it stands right now. So, if one was to put oneself in the chairs of the authorities, what would you do when you're looking at the prospect of renewing or giving new concessions to 3 American originated companies who currently control approximately or just under 50% of a gaming revenue in a Chinese jurisdiction, with all these other political factors now coming into the picture? And, it is something that has been underrated over the last 3 to 4 years, but right now I think, greater credence should be paid to these potential risks.
Thank you, Ben. David, to what extent will Macau be dragged into this, or is there any chance of being relatively insulated?
Well, I think there's a strong chance that Macau will be featuring in this debate. I think it's a simplistic view to say that it really depends on who the next occupant of the White House is as to where this relationship goes between the two powers. I think that really oversimplifies it. There are some quite fundamental issues here. I mean, the imbalance of trade between China and the US, the fact that the pivot now for the US is really to try and claw back manufacturing jobs that it's lost to China over the years. And in general, it's in the interests of no one that the present incumbent in the White House stays there to manage that relationship beyond January of next year. I think that will certainly exacerbate things. The reporting I'm seeing is that China is really angling for a change in the administration. If that was to occur, it's hard to say whether it's going to produce any instant results. But I think what it would do is enable a reset of the relationship. And unfortunately, the relationship has all really gone downhill fast. And it's not just the US. I mean, Australia is having the same issue with China at the moment. So I think we do need a reset, and it may or may not happen after November 3.
We have a question from Eddie Wong that asks, do you foresee Macau being utilized as a leverage for China and the US and China trade war, or Macau is a tiny little piece of this chess game?
Oh, I honestly think that that's very difficult to answer because we don't know what is going to happen. It is possible, as David said and Bentley said, it is possible that Macau cannot avoid entering that, being involved in this trade war and this escalating trade war. I think that even with the current US administration, there is a clear realization. Let's not forget we are in pre-election mode now, but when we look back, there's a clear realization that if you want to do significant public work, significant increase on the military-industrial complex and so on, someone will have to buy your treasury bonds. So the interdependence in terms between China and the US is not going to disappear anytime soon, and both sides know that. This said, it is possible that a directive comes, even if it is, and the worst would be if it would be a directive that would say something like reduce the influence of American companies in Macau, because the way of doing that may be very, very complicated to handle. Also, we are dealing with a dual situation, because on the one hand, these kind of political directives can be issued in terms under the basic law. That can happen. They probably will not be publicized, whilst the tender will have to be an open international tender that will have to follow the law and will be subject to a high level of scrutiny. So the image and the brand of Macau internationally will be at stake. So this is one of the most difficult things that may happen during the coming tender. So let's see. I don't think that we need to get too anguished before January. And let's see how things evolve from that. I don't think that it is on January that this kind of issues are going to be solved. So let's see if a change in American leadership may change the tug of commercial war that we are seeing today.
Let me talk on a fact, and let me ask our panel experts if they consider interesting enough for a comment. This year, in a very unusual move, the central government liaison office in Macau decided to visit gaming operators and junkets. The excuse was to thank the support given during this pandemic. And I say excuse because I didn't see the liaison office visiting companies for the same reason. And all these years, this was nothing that the liaison office would do it in such a high profile. Despite Donald Trump's attacks on China, the fact that 3 of the gaming operators are American and one of them sends China, that belongs to Sheldon Adelson, one of Trump's main financier and allies, how do you see these visits that can be only described as political by the liaison office? Anyone?
Let me just probably throw my shoe in. I don't think that is a remarkable an occurrence because the China liaison probably about what, about six or so years ago. Prior to that, they never really reached out or got involved with the casino, with the junket operators, and barely with the casino operators. But probably about 6-7 years ago, I may be wrong on the date, they started having conversations with not only the casino operators, but also with the junket operators, whereby, you know, they were, those, the two latter parties were invited to meetings with the people in CLO. So I think this renewal of that relationship is not all that surprising to me, to be honest.
Well,
Okay.
I will not read also too much on it. Let's see.
okay, so coming back here to Rui Cunha Foundation's auditorium, anyone willing to follow up on any of the questions, or anyone with an additional remark? Lloyd Robson, please.
Given the discussion around the US contingent of concessionaires or sub-concessionaires, is there any view around, I guess there's a proven formula in Philippines where the government operate casinos. Is there any risk that one or some of the contingency could maybe find their way back into government-run casino operations in Macau?
Okay. Question? David or George or Ben?
I think David or Josh would be better positioned to answer that.
David, go ahead.
I mean, that speculation has been abroad for a little while. And the context of it that I'm familiar with was where the government would, it doesn't need a concession, obviously, it owns the rights to gaming by nature anyway in Macau, but if it was to establish a company and to float that company, for example, on the Hong Kong Exchange, it would give it a rather neat means of getting rid of the wealth sharing system, which it seems to have locked itself into inexorably over the last 6 or 7 years. Now, it's probably asking too much of a government which won't even consider a sovereign fund or sovereign wealth fund as an alternative to the current rather opaque arrangements with Macau Foundation. And I think it may make some sense to see that happening, but frankly, it's not the business of government to run or be involved in that sort of operation. They could be involved in the equity in the operation, but I suspect it would not be a government-run or a government-staffed operation. But it's certainly not impossible, as I understand it.
Thank you, David.
I'll be more blunt than David. The answer is no. It's not going to happen. There'd be no PACOR similar mechanism. Actually, it's a shameful mechanism. I mean, in the beginning, it made sense. PACOR had monopoly of the operation. That the government of the Philippines had not understood that it is not a brilliant move to have the government, through its regulator, competing at the same time with new operators is something that is unbelievable in the civilized world. So to make it plain, I don't think Macau will ever go that way. Many mistakes can be made. I don't think it's going to go that way. It's also not going to go the way the Nordic countries, for instance, in Europe, operate lotteries or sports betting. They don't like to have the idea of having private operators making money on punters betting, so they run it through the state. That is not the Macau model. It has not been in any of the concessions. I mean, don't look just at gaming, look at all the other kinds of concession. I don't think that's going to change now. And so, yes, with all due respect, we have many interesting things to discuss. I don't think this is one. Let's move ahead.
Okay. So now I'd like to ask Nuno to make a remark, and I guess you also have some questions.
Questions not really. I just wanted to make what I could say, it's a remark regarding the quality of the panel that we had here today. The questions that were answered and the questions that are raised are very important for the future of Macau and especially for the gambling.
Nuno, can you talk more to your microphone?
Okay.
Thank you.
Maybe my...
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, okay. And also to make a remark that I have to do it myself because you guys are not going to do it. That is the excellent work that Macau Business and Cunha Foundation, but especially you, José Carlos and Paulo Azevedo are doing on this initiative because it's quite remarkable that we have this kind of initiatives that are, as far as I know, worldwide viewed as the case of this one was. Just a point that we have discussed on this second part, mainly the online gaming. I think the conclusion is that online gaming is not happening soon or ever in Macau because the conditions are not created to that to happen. And also very interesting discussion about the political tensions between US and China that may have some impact on what we are discussing today.
Thank you, Nuno. It's all possible thanks to our partnership with Cunha Foundation. Of course, today, thanks to this distinguished panel. Paulo, I'm sure there's still a lot of questions. We're running short of time. But
and I do have, let me attack this one immediately. Gonçalo Melweitor says, seeing how China is on the lead role on blockchain technology, 5G, and even on the verge of having its own cryptocurrency, should Macau have a revised gaming law accommodating these features? I'm going to take advantage to put something else. If it was today, Jorge, with all you know, what changes would you do in the current gaming law in order to improve it? What else what else would you do it if it was today?
Well, Paulo, it's an interesting question, but that would take us a long time. The first thing that must be assumed is that the law was drafted at a time where there was not a lot of critical mass, which does not mean that there would be a lot to change, to be honest. I really, when we talk about the law, perhaps we should talk about the law and the regulation regards the tender itself, because that's where you have the criteria for the adjudications and so on. So in this regard, I don't think that we have a lot of things to change. We have, but it depends, again, you do laws following public policy that is defined. So in my opinion, what happened before, which was a chief executive that knew reasonably well about the gaming sector and knew in which direction, knew more or less what he wanted to do, was enough for the draft of the law. Today, I think that we have enough critical mass in Macau, and it is far wiser for the government to listen to the different sectors of the society before imposing anything on the law. I would change, for instance, the kind of games that are allowed. I would take poker out of that because it's not conceptually. I don't think it gives any. I don't think it's clear that it is a game of chance. Actually, it's a foot on. It's us shooting on the foot, for instance, as regards the possibility of having online gaming with poker operators on a broader sense and to raise more revenue. But there aren't that many things to change. There are things to revisit, yes, but to revisit carefully, because many times in many laws in Macau, the lawmaking process is fast, it's expeditious. The number of entities consulted is small, and you don't have a lot of people understanding what is going on, and there's not a lot of criticism. On the gaming law, there was a serious debate in the Legislative Assembly. There was a serious debate in the Executive Council, and this debate will probably be multiplied 10 times fold today. So I don't think anyone should fool themselves that this is going to be able to be done the same way it was done last time. So, but going back to your issue, we need to have a clear definition of public policy. Is the public, I mean, I'm not talking about, for instance, the nature of the casino gaming concession. That probably will stay. I don't think anyone would be willing to risk parting from that model, or the model of an oligopolistic framework with a high level of taxation. I don't think we are going to depart from that. But discussions on in-kind obligations, discussions on whether we should allow junkets becoming operators, casino concessionaires, as you mentioned before, with one example, these kind of things must be discussed. They have been discussed before between four walls, and there was a public policy inherent to what was done and to what was not done. And today, I don't think that you can keep those discussions and that public policy between four walls. It has to be open, or it's going to implode in your hands.
Carlos Simões asks, should the government reduce the gaming tax and instead ask the operators to take direct investment in other areas, for instance, transportation, to support and increase the diversification of Macau economy, or we continue to talk on the same things, more tax, less tax, and there are other areas that should be addressed more urgently. Jorge, David, Ben?
Well, in terms of context,
but I prefer David to go ahead.
I don't see the government having any appetite to reduce the tax rate. And I think the chief executive may have said as much in recent weeks. Certainly it's a high rate of taxation, but if we return to historic levels of activity, it's not a ridiculous tax rate. My concern really is with the way in which government spends its money, or more particularly doesn't spend it. I mean, Macau has chronically underspent its revenue budgets for most of the last 15 years. And particularly in the current environment where it doesn't have yet the infrastructure that it needs to really accommodate much further growth in the industry. It does require a different model of accountability, I think, for the way in which those funds are used. I mean, accountability was never a hallmark of government exchequer work in Macau. But I think that has to change, because there is increasingly a pressure on government now to not only justify continuing to impose tax at the current rate, but more importantly, to advise people what it's doing with the money to ensure that Macau can move forward at the rate it needs to.
I agree with David in that there is no obvious incentive to reduce the tax rate. I mean, you would do it if you don't have enough interest, potential interest in the forthcoming tender at this point in time. As I said, you know, given that the Japan market is basically fallen on its sword, there are no other markets in the world that has the potential that Macau has. So there's zero incentive for the authorities to reduce the tax rate, because the number of interests or interested operators in Macau is still extremely high, probably one of the highest in the world.
It's true. Well, I agree with both of you, but there's more than that. First, the last time when we had no indication, we had no studies that had been done showing if the rate should go up or down, so we decided to keep it. And the reaction in the Executive Council and in the Legislative Council was very negative. And why? Because when politicians are looking at this, their perception is that what they want, what they ask is, how much are casino operators giving back to the community? And even if casino operators think that they give back a lot and that they are doing a lot of charitable work and are contributing a lot to the society, it is surprising to see how many politicians have a different way of viewing things. And that's why the tax rate went up, because they thought that the STDM, and they measured all other coming operators by STDM, they thought that they were not giving back to the community, so the tax rate was increased. And in Macau, and also in the community of investment analysts, I keep repeating to people, do not raise this issue. You're making a bad service to your companies and to the people whom you render services to. To raise the issue of the tax rate is the first step to have the tax rate going up, not down as these people think they're doing very cleverly. So this is the first thing. The second thing is that we see a resurgence in Macau of the idea that in-kind obligations, as they happened before in the STDM contracts, and as they happen also in other parts of the world, this is not a unique thing of Macau, that they should come back. And let me be clear about this. They should not come back. They were taken away. The only one that was kept for practical reasons was the dredging obligation that STDM had to dredge the jet fuel canals and the navigation canals in Macau, because that could not be changed, and the government did not want to have that obligation. And SGM became jointly liable for that, and that was calculated in a certain way as part of one of the contributions. But apart from that, all the other in-kind obligations were cut off. And they should be cut off for two reasons. First, because politically, there is no leverage today for having casino operators to be involved in many other areas of Macau's business. Even if they could bring immediate fast talent to speed up the diversification of the economy, that would be politically unwise to do. And sooner or later, if there would be no veto immediately from the central government, I have no doubt that the central authorities would increase the screening on Macau on what was going on with large foreign groups growing into other areas of the Macau economy. This is the first reason. The second reason is also, in very plain terms, that those in-kind obligations, the in-kind clauses, I incentivize investigators to go in to look into them. They are hidden clauses that are not a brilliant example of the past. When one of the obligations was the obligation to develop the lower part of Taipa Island, I mean, you can immediately see how difficult it was for the casino operator to have not only a right of first refusal, but really the right to ask for additional pieces of land to be concessioned to them so that they could develop them. It was really, you can see how difficult, how tremendously difficult that was to be done. So these kind of in-kind obligations that are borderline with things that we should want to eradicate from the society, they need to go. And also, you know, the contributions are a bit in the same way, for reasons that David mentioned. I mean, why do we have contributions for one entity or for specific purposes in general? And then you have everybody wanting to screen if that is being complied or not, if that, and if, how is the foundation that receives the money applying the money? If the government wants to have leeway in the way in which it applies the funds that come from the Macau gaming tax, as it seems very clear after 20 years that it wants to have complete leverage, then scrap the damn thing. It's not doing anything but causing embarrassment.
I don't know about you, Zé Carlos. For me, I have only one question to the panel, which is, well, nowadays there's good news. More mainland tourists are being allowed to enter the city, still without impact. But some people from the junkets are saying that the tourists from Guangdong, for instance, they are staying a week instead of staying only 1.3 days per visit. And after the 23rd of this month, the tourist visas are extended to all China. On top of that, recent news that I would like to pick your brains, that the central government is putting a lot of pressure on other gaming destinations, meaning creating extra obstacles to Chinese gamblers if they want to go to other destinations, Singapore, the Philippines, the most obvious. Are these real good news for Macau, or will not matter at all, since Macau needs to deal with new problems as well, namely the more tight control of capitals leaving mainland, the stronger and more coherent attacks against transborder gaming, and so on and so on.
Let me
Ben?
answer. Yeah, thank you, Paulo. I'll answer that for you. So yes, we did see an edict from the central government, I think about 3 years ago, that no Chinese individuals, no corporation will be allowed to invest in gaming projects anywhere in the world. Yet, to this day, what we've seen is not only Chinese state-owned enterprises getting involved in gaming, and not only are Chinese conglomerates getting involved in gaming, we're also seeing, you got to remember, we're also seeing the likes of Macau-based operators. And I'm not talking just about the Americans, I'm talking about the locals, the ones who are supposedly in tune with Beijing, likes of Melco and Galaxy, looking to invest in the Philippines, looking to invest in Japan, and have invested in Europe, Cyprus. And you've got to ask the question, what is the real true indication of China's objective in this regard? Are they really wanting to preserve Macau, or have they now opened themselves to the possibility of, if we can't beat them, let's join them, but let's have our people control this potential spreading out of gaming, in the region. So, I'm answering a question with a question, Paulo, but there you have it. Because in our role, we have seen, and whilst 2020 has been pretty quiet, we're now starting to see an explosion of new gaming projects in Indochina by large Chinese conglomerates. And these are people who one would assume to be very much in tune with China's interests.
So actually, I would, hooking up on what Bentley was talking about, is the issue of the sort of addict, and actually this was mentioned back then, about 20 years ago, very specifically by then leader Jiang Zemin, of not having state-owned companies involved in Macau's gaming business, of course. But then, do you see that somehow, this leads me to the question of when you're talking about the potential restructuring of shareholder structure, do you see new players directly or indirectly coming from the north, kind of playing a role in the future? Is that a possibility?
I think it's a possibility, although the way they would probably enter the Macau market is, again, this is pure speculation, is probably through indirect entities rather than to Chinese state-owned entities.
Sure.
Now, in terms of what I mentioned earlier about Chinese state-owned entities, you have a project over on the east coast of the US where China Exim Bank, together with the China State Construction Company, together with the New World Group, who, by the way, own Charter Folk, the largest jewelry chain in China, are now owning and operating a casino resort directly. And then you have, as I said, you have a lot of China Link enterprises who are now operating in Jeju Island in Korea. And as mentioned earlier, and I won't name them, but conglomerates who own airlines, who own real estate, huge real estate developments over in the major capitals in China, developing new gaming projects in Indochina. So, it would not be far-fetched to extend that and to extend that into the possibility of, and I'll call it very loosely, Chinese interest coming into Macau indirectly and diluting out the Americans, if that's one of the possible scenarios.
Thank you, Ben. David and George, for the wrap-up, would you like to follow up on what Ben was saying, or something else that you think is important to be said as a sort of final and closing remark? David.
Yeah, thanks for that. Look, I don't have any specific wonderful insights other than such I've been able to share so far. But one thing I would say is this, that, and I'm not COVID obsessed, although it's destroyed my business personally, but quite aside from that, I remain on the sidelines a bit with it. But you're moving into winter very shortly in the Northern Hemisphere. You've probably got a couple of months. And I think if the experience of Australia is any indication, there's a very good chance that the virus will make a reappearance. And I think anyone who feels that it's disappeared is probably being deluded. There won't be an effective vaccine, according to epidemiologists that I follow, if at all, until well into next year. So my advice would be fasten your seatbelt, because I'm not convinced that it won't reappear in China and destroy the whole bubble which Macau is trying to build with China.
Thank you, David. George, any final words?
Okay.
Fastening your
In general,
seatbelt? Any silver lining?
No, look, I already spoke plenty, just, and I think plainly, I like to do it, to shoot straight.
We thank you for that.
Look, in general terms, I would say this. Obviously for Macau, going back to what Paulo mentioned, for Macau it is crucial that visitation increases, and visitation from the mainland, and that special mechanisms and certain level of goodwill from the central authorities exists. This is not only a corporate issue. It's true that Macau has two large reserves, the exchange reserve and the reserve fund, but it is dramatic, the level of loss of revenue at all levels. So it is necessary that the central authorities bear this in mind, and I think that this will take place. There are many variables that we cannot control. David is right. We don't even need to go to Australia and to the coming winter. In Europe, you have still fine weather, and you already have second waves and probably a third wave being estimated soon. So everybody's trying to mitigate that and learning to live with that. So yes, it is possible that that also happens in China, and it is possible that that changes the way in which visitation will take place. But I think Paulo is right. It is absolutely necessary to look into ways to increase visitation, and I'm pretty sure that the Macau government and Macau authorities are doing that. Last but not the least, although we are gaming experts and we are today focused on discussing gaming, it is important to realize that the Macau government is under tremendous pressure. This one and the past one is under tremendous pressure to do things that actually should have been done and were not done. Namely, putting in place mechanisms that help liberalize, that help diversify the economy, to exercise the mandate to create a platform for financial services. I was there as a member of the Portuguese government at the time when Prime Minister Li Keqiang was very clear. Li Keqiang was very clear in the sense that Macau would be authorized and was authorized to create a platform of financial services. 4 years have passed, nothing was done. So there are many things that are in the plate of the Macau government, apart from gaming and the issues that we solved tonight. This said, and understanding that the pressure on those new areas may be taking a lot of time, it is not wise to think that that the tender on casino gaming is a simple thing that you don't need to think deeply about that. It is not a simple thing. It may become a very, very worrisome problem in your hands if it is not properly done and handled, and can seriously damage the image of Macau if it is not done properly. So this is the kind of thing that I think is important to remind from time to time. Thank you very much.
We thank you, Jorge. With this note, a view from the bridge, somehow we wrap up our talk. We'd like to thank you all. Thank you very much, our distinguished panel speakers, Jorge Oliveira, David Green, Ben Lee, our discussant, Nuno Sardinha da Mata, my co-chair, Paulo Azevedo, all of you here at Rui Cunha Foundation, all of you who have been following us through via Zoom, via Facebook. You can then watch the whole segment and also some segments of this show both on Rui Cunha Foundation's platforms and on Macau Businesses and MBTV's platforms. Stay tuned, keep a close eye on it. I would like to thank Rui Cunha Foundation for yet another fruitful partnership. We will be back. Thank you all. We'll be back soon with another installment of the MBtv Rui Cunha Foundation talk series. Thank you very much. Good evening. Good night. Thank you. Good morning, Josh, or good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Ben. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Cheers, George.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
That's very
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Very nice.
Thank you. Likewise. Nice to meet you after all these years.